Okay, great. So welcome. We're going to talk about FOLIO Platforms today. Talks here. Related subjects. So this is the description you've all seen here. So we're going to discuss sort of how to introduce the concept and resolve the concept of the platform of the FOLIO project. All right. So the problem we have is that for 8 years of this project, and yes, it's been 8 years. I had to double check that. We started back in August 2015. The word platform has been used different ways, different contexts, whether it be in UI development, architecture, or anything else. And so sometimes it's been referred to what is top picture here, which is sort of a metaphor of a power strip, where you would have a power strip as a platform and then you plug in different appliances. Other times it refers to sort of a particular build of FOLIO. On the DevOps side, we kind of think it that way. Then, but ultimately, sometimes it refers to, and this is maybe more typical than UI or refers to a combination of a set of applications for FOLIO and that are serving a particular purpose. So this bottom picture is what I'm going to propose, discuss in more detail, namely that concept of tiers, and we have a platform that is constructed from the set of applications above it. So, but before we can talk about that, we have to sort of discuss a little bit what's an app. So the app presentation is happening tomorrow at that first, but the application is another notion that we're trying to sort of clean up and straighten up in the project. So what is an application? Let's talk tomorrow as a link. But generally speaking, the high points of that presentation will be that you can define an application to be as involved. The minimal but complete set of elements which together are intended to deliver a specific FOLIO. So if you think about it, that's something like circulation. Solve the circulation problem, and that's the solution. It might be orders, invoicing. So that's sort of the mental concept of a functionality is provided. And one of the key notions on the application that we'll cover in tomorrow's talk, that FOLIO right now is structured very much horizontally, where you have the back end of FOLIO, and then you've got the UI layer on top of it. And they're built and they are released somewhat independent. And you have connections between them, but you will build the back end, deploy it, and then you will build the front end according to whatever configuration you have in your particular system and push it out through a different mechanism. So the idea with applications is a vertical alignment, so that rather than deliver all the UI pieces, all the UI modules that could possibly ever be used in a particular situation, you focus on coupling a little more closely the UI elements that go with the corresponding backend elements, sort of the vertical slicing, all that. And of course, the missing piece that we have is there is no formalization of it. So we have formalization of other things like modules, and applications don't have a descriptor. So I think the key elements to understand is we want to have one. So this is the visual, sort of to give you an idea. If you look at FOLIO this way, and you have the central copy gateway, around that you have these circles, which are essentially the backend modules, some of which have persistent storage and some don't. Then there are stripes above that provide the framework for the UI, and you have UI modules, and attempting to show sort of there's a color connection between them, so the UI elements kind of go with the backend elements. But if you look at a particular color, as highlighted on the right-hand side, the UI elements, the backend elements that together deliver that functionality, for inventory or circulation, that is your application stack. That includes backend elements, some storage, some business logic, UI, and then also the edge API. And of course, this is formalized. So, all right, enough said about applications. This talks about platforms. So assuming that we can figure out application, then we similarly need to embrace common definition of platform. Understand what that means for the project. So I'm proposing here this definition, which is a particular combination of folio applications together with the folio core, which delivers a specific system solution. So it is essentially representing the stack that we have. So there are a couple of interesting consequences to this model. One of which that there can be multiple folio platforms. It's not like there's a folio platform, but the folio platform is there are different ones, and there can be many. It's also consistent with sort of the notion we have how we separate things out into platform complete or other similar type of build legal versions of platform. And that the application, the platform itself, we should think of, sure, it's a stack of things, but we can organize that stack. Think of it as our three central tiers in that stack. And those tiers would be core, what I'm calling functional. I don't mean it's the one that actually does something. I mean the tier that provides the function of the particular platform. You have a LSP, it provides the function of the, and an extended tier. And this is, also somewhat consistent with how we build our release. But right now, those are just managed through a JSON file, spell JSON file. But if we could formalize that, we could have additional capabilities like specifying having better control over versions that go into particular platform releases. Okay, so let's go on. So this is the visual of what that would look like. Essentially, you have this stack representing a platform. And the platform itself, has multiple tiers. And one of the things, so the three tiers are the following. We have the core, which is really the basic functionality of Folio. It's something like it's enough to get you a running Folio, sometimes referred to as platform minimal, that does nothing. Right? You can log into it, and that's just about it. You have no icons, you have no ability to do it. But it's working. It's got a database, it's got a UI, you can log in. Then you add on to it the applications that are intended for that particular functional purpose, the LSP application. Or it could be, another case, could be an ERM application only, so it's a different stack. And then above that are extended here, which could represent basically optional things, or generally applications that are not needed by everybody's installation. And so examples of this, are you have certain applications that require subscriptions, or they're only relevant if you have a particular integration. And notably, what this does, that there's a Folio platform, there's a power release. Notice that they're not the same. Power release subset of a little more on that later. So let's talk about that extended tier a little more. As I said, these are optional applications, but they're right. You don't need them in everybody's LSP installation. They're not critical to solving the function. They rely on third-party services. They may be, integration required services for whatever. And what it also does by doing this is it shifts the responsibility of compatibility of these applications from the project, the Folio project itself, the community, to whomever is providing these optional modules for applications, which for the most part are, in their interest to do that because they're trying to promote a particular type of activity. So it shifts the responsibility, maintenance responsibility, deployment, compatibility responsibility. So, examples, right? We could imagine like the integration module that's currently part of the Apollo release. It's not needed, by the way. If you don't have an integration, why have it? Holdings, the EBSCO ERM module. If you don't subscribe to the service, then you don't. And one of the key things here is that this will reduce the size. Diagram is showing you have a stack, and if the flower is not the whole platform, just functional and the core, then it becomes relatively stable. The problem we have currently is that every time we create a new module, there's this race to get it in the next release, and the release is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So by limiting just the basic functionality of an LSP platform, for example, to the modules that are essential, you can add more as they go along and put them in the extended tier. Most of them are optional. They're extensions, they're add-ons, and sure, there will be some additional modules or applications that get put into the project release, into the cloud release, but there'll be far fewer. So we have stability of the project, and obviously, this is one of the key things to do this is that we have to have a different model than we have now for operational side of the board. So one of the reasons why people want to get their favorite application into the release is that it simplifies deployment. You just take the whole package of Folio, a monolithic release, you install it, and you'll have your stuff there. You don't have to do that. You can take a Folio deployment and you can manually in DevOps scripts add applications to a running Folio instance. But it's cumbersome. The mechanisms for doing this are not the greatest within Folio. So if we want to do this kind of a thing, we have to invest a little bit, being able to make it easier to add applications onto a previously deployed Folio. So as an example here, commented before, there could be multiple Folio platforms in this model. An example here is Folio LSP platform, which we're familiar with, which is solving the LSP problem. So it consists of Folio Core, which is that absolutely bare minimal platform element that lets you just run Folio and do nothing. And then you put onto it the set of applications that are needed for running on ILS. And then additional things that are related to an ILS functionality, but they're optional. Right-hand side, we have sort of a different platform. You can say, by the way, this exists. I mean, we run things this way at EBSCO. You can have an ERM only. What that means is you only need a subset of the applications functional. You don't need to have everything because you really just focused on it. So this is a different stack. One key point here is that the Folio Core element remains the same across. You don't have to modify systemizing the core every time you open the platform. But the key to doing this, as I mentioned earlier, is we need to have formalization. So it's one thing to describe a platform. So you create structures, code, in the GitHubs that define what platform helps. So the idea is to introduce the concept of a platform descriptor. Essentially a manifest document that describes what goes into a particular platform. That one consists of the metadata that into the platform, et cetera, and other details. The versioning scheme, so we would control the versioning of the platform at that level, at the platform level. And it would then contain references to the application descriptors, or if you formalize applications, get descriptors. But then you could say, well, this platform consists of the following applications. We do that by making a reference to their descriptors within the platform descriptor. And then we should further identify within this platform descriptor which of the applications are intended to be full, which are intended functional, which are. So what we have here is a couple consequences. One is that applications are not unique to a platform. So you can find the same applications showing up in different platforms. In the ERM platform versus the LSP platform we saw before, you could have both of them containing the same. They're going to be a subset. ERM is going to be a subset of the other one. So these are common applications between them. So it's not a one-to-one, it's not unique. As I mentioned before, the core here has to be included by everything. You can't really have a FOIA platform unless you include the FOIA core. And it needs to identify its dependencies. Right? This is obviously going to be challenging. But platform wants to describe the entire system. Whereas if you bundle everything you need to put out on a server to run Folio, it actually needs more than just more than just the Folio elements. So there's a slide on this further, but I'm just letting you know it's coming. We have to account for more than just the Folio. So here's the visual. What's interesting about this model, assuming we have the application description, that we have a nice hierarchy here. So on the right-hand side, we have what we're used to now, which is modules. And the modules have module descriptors describing. So if you consider an application to be a module, then the application comes. And it references the module descriptor, module. Then we go to the next level and we say, well, the platform descriptor is based on application. It references the application descriptors that they in turn will bring in all the modules. What's nice about this is that this is a layering, which is backward compatible with how Folio is now. You don't need to make dramatic changes to Folio across the board to make this work because we already have module descriptors. It's basically two levels that sit on top of that.
Also worth mentioning that each of these have their own version. So the module descriptors have a distinct version. The application descriptors would have a version. Platform descriptors have their version as well.
So why would we do this? What are the benefits that have this? So as Perry was saying, get better control of versioning platform. We have exit mechanisms for doing that, but it's more formal. We have versioning at the platform level, which is its own versions. We have versioning at the application levels, each of which contain just versioning at one. So the idea is that at least at the application level, you will ensure that the application you have is compatible with a particular version. So this allows a number of different things, but it allows essentially applications to have sort of a life cycle which is separate from that of the platform. But rather to get away from the monolithic pieces, we basically are allowing applications to interact with the version of the platform and ensure that they have compatibility with a particular version of the platform, kind of like the way that different versions of applications on your laptop will have compatibility to specific versions of the operating system. For the most part, this benefits really automation, hosting operations. This is a benefit. It's a systematic way of producing very concise things to allow scripting, allow CI/CD to work better, and it's definitely a benefit of hosting operations. Bring systems up to date and update them. As I mentioned before, one of the big benefits, at least in my mind, is that you can prevent that continuous growth of the monolithic firewalls. They remain relatively stable at that point, and they don't need to be growing all the time. In fact, by looking at the current file release, identifying those things which really ought to be in an extended tier, we will reduce the size of the file release, and quite potentially we may be able to reduce. Okay. Reduce the, is that better? The mics are over here. Right. Okay. Yeah, and reduce the size of the platform as it is now by moving a number of things into the extended tier. And further down the road, much further down the road, there's a concept we've been better. Okay. All right. One of the things that we often talked about in the project is the idea of having a marketplace or an app store so that we could make deliverable different functionalities in the form of applications and encourage third parties to join the project by providing their specialized functionality, making it available and having the ability to insert it into to a given platform version of Folio, a particular platform stack. This has always been, the vision. We've always thought one of the things we did starting this project was to say, if I'm a small outfit somewhere, or a small group, and I want to really, I'm a specialist in this particular technology, and I want to make it available to libraries, I have to build a whole ILS to make it. That doesn't really work. So this allows these groups to create just their functionality they want, that they're specialists in, and make it work with a platform, which is Folio. Okay. Lots of questions. Yeah. So of course, there are still some challenges for getting there, right? It's not a slam dunk. So one of them is that we have to formalize the applications, right? We can't have a platform that is a collection or stack of applications if we haven't formalized them. So we need to do that. And that in turn is going to be its own challenge, because we have a lot of intermodule dependencies that exist now in Folio, and partitioning out that monolithic Folio platform that we have now into distinct applications will require some amount of dependency reduction, or at least dependency control. So that is going to be a challenge. But this will also, I mentioned before, require us to make it easier to install an application onto a previously deployed version of Folio without having to re-release the entire thing. One of the key points that I did not mention so far, that you can't just have Wild West versions of applications. There needs to be some qualification that an application is actually going to be legitimately acceptable to run in a Folio installation. But if we shift the responsibility of the maintaining that module and its compatibility to the provider of the module, the extended modules, then it's going to be challenging. We need to have some formal mechanisms to either validate or certify anything that goes into that extended tier. The question has come up before. I've been saying platform. Some question if that's the right word. I mean, have some existing use of the word platform project. We did the first slide with 3 different. There are probably more. Maybe there's a better word for platform, so don't be concerned about that if we have to come up with a different term. Just a consistency of calling it platform here. And so, there's a broader question as to, who defines, owns the different platforms. If you have multiple Folio platforms, how much is how much responsibility of this community? Say this is the Folio community, but maybe someone else is creating a different version, or maybe someone else is creating a specialized version. How do they maintain and ensure that platform as it moves forward and evolves over time? So there's a question as to the processes that have to be put in place to manage individual platforms. We have one release coordination now for the monolith, but if we divide up into platforms, we'll need to find the processes to manage those separately from each other.
Right. It kind of poses some questions for the community to figure out, how many platforms are we going to provide as a community? Who determines, for a given application, whether it's in the extended tier or in the functional tier? And in some cases, it may be on one platform, it's in the extended tier, and another platform, it's in the functional tier. So how do you manage all these things? There's some processes that the community would need to formalize and come up with to sort these things out.
So we can take this notion of platforms, and as I've described them so far, it's really just a collection of specific Folio applications. But as mentioned earlier, there's more to it than that. It doesn't give you a working Folio system. You need to have other things, third-party elements added to it. So for example, you can't run your Folio without having database Postgres or the Kafka queue, search engine. So how do you ensure that those are properly controlled with versioning, make sure they're compatible, and so forth? So the notion here, and this is what out there, is to say, well, we can really maybe encapsulate each of these third-party components with the concept of a virtual application. So it's not as if we're really doing anything other than the standard deployment, where we're sort of bundling them at a wrapper, describing them with the same mechanisms and applications that we have in Folio, and you can say, well, to run this version of the platform, you need to have these following versions or later versions of these applications, and you need to have this particular version of, say, Postgres. So we could wrap that up in the metadata of this for a virtual application. And if we do that with everything that's needed to run Folio, everything that needs to be installed separately by the hosting, then we will have a complete stack. We will have a complete definition of everything you need to deploy and run Folio system. So, more words on the notion of application stores. So, we've had this idea for a long time about doing this, and it's come in from different angles. And there's application stores, which is probably familiar with your iPhone or your Android stores, but the marketplace is essentially another concept, which again was always there at the beginning, which is essentially a commercial version of application store. So we want to, I think, encourage Folio as a project to do lots of things. And one of the reasons we chose to do Apache v2 licensing on it is that it would encourage third parties who may have a commercial interest to develop their specialized extensions to Folio and market them through their own marketplaces. So this is an opportunity that comes up here, because ultimately, I personally believe this is probably the fastest way to grow Folio and the community as a project. It's not so much about getting to provide more developers or resources or anything. It's really about bringing in groups that have a vested interest in Folio and having them develop something and contribute at the application level, as opposed to contribute at the manpower level, but kind of focused on that.
So one thing to note here is that by adopting platforms or this platform formalization, it's not like we automatically get this capability to have an app store or marketplace. It's a step in that direction. It's sort of an enabler in that sense.
Correct. Well, I went through those pretty quickly, faster than I thought, but that's okay, because this topic has been bouncing around various groups at various points, and each time we started discussing this, and whether it's the Tech Council or other subgroups of the community, then it was always like, well, this is a bigger topic. We need to address this with the broader Folio community. So this was the opportunity, this presentation, to communicate this model. Hopefully we'll get lots of questions. We'll have their opinions. We're going to have the conversation. So, any questions from the audience? What do you have?
This is a very basic question. It mentioned that you could have a situation where an app is in the extended tier for one platform and in the application tier for another. Give me an example just to like better illustrate that.
Sure. So, example. So I'm not sure question. The question was an example of how an application may be in the functional tier in one platform, but an extended in the other. So, thinking through this.
I have an example.
Yes, go ahead.
So, let's just say you have your platform is the ERM platform, and you some libraries may want to track their ERM, their electronic resources and inventory, and others may not. And so maybe for the LSP platform, inventory is obviously a central piece. important piece of the LSP. But for the ERM, it may be optional, right? And then, so in that case, it may live in the experience. Obviously, this is at a sort of an abstract level, so we're not, there's a lot that needs to happen with breaking apart the interdependencies to enable this sort of thing to happen. That's one of the examples that comes to mind.
Yeah, and that's obviously something we couldn't do today because of the dependency problem. Or is in the middle of it. But the converse is also true in AWS. Is the ERM modules like that, holdings application, is kind of optional. You don't necessarily need it. 5 tips. So that would be the LSP platform, that would be an extended. But for ERM, it really is a key piece of ERM functionality. It's about electronic holdings map. So maybe that would be included in the function. Question. Yeah, right. Yeah, comment from Brooks. Acquisitions would be a similar situation. You're right.
I get you right. I mean, it's all the question about the perspective. I mean, every institution designing their platform, they think is what they need. If you are running an LSP platform that has ERM integrated, ERM is essential. You call it. So in the same, you can do with circulation, you can do with acquisition. It always depends on the plan. So I think what we define as in general, we manage that as community need as a community definition, vision, portfolio with.
Can I just ask a question? Are the microphones working for the audience?
It's a good question.
Right, should I repeat?
So Engel, for anyone that's on Zoom, can you confirm that you can hear the questions from the audience?
No, I didn't understand this.
Question, Vince.
So, yeah, it was a long question.
Sorry.
The gist of it, at least that I understood, it was like, if every institution, every hosting organization decides what is essential or optional for them, what they deploy, how do we manage and define, what goes into each essentially? To me, at least, the answer was in the question, which is each institution defines their platform, because that is kind of the purpose, is that you can define your platform and really which tier you belong to is not a property of the application, it's a property of the platform. So the applications are applications, and if a particular organization wants to create a platform that presents what they need or what they're offering if they're a provider, then they can define that and they decide which goes into which tier. Okay, I think Todd, you had your hand up. Oh, Jeremy. Okay.
So when you put up on the screen the LSP platform, that called to mind immediately for me this idea that there would be a LSP platform, but it's sounding like that there will be as many platforms as there are distributions or instances of Folio.
Right.
I think it could be either way, right?
When you repeat that, so Jeremy was saying that he's observing that really, when we see a drawing like this that says LSP platform, it's not like there's one LSP platform. There may be multiple LSP platforms depending on what distribution.
Yeah, and I guess a follow-up question to that would be something I'm gonna have to think about some more.
Okay, all right.
I think Todd was next. Todd?
Descriptors, are they all just applications, applications?
Right. Yeah.
distinction between extended and functional.
Yeah.
Part of the description.
So for the online folks, the question was, are the tiers represented in the platform descriptor? Identify which applications fit where. And the answer is yes. So the concept is the formalization of platform descriptor would reference the application descriptors, but also identify which tier they belong to. So the tiers are formalized as part of the description. Back in.
So everything you said is great. I'm standing up just so I can project more.
Let me just repeat that. Everything I said is great.
I'm not platform for it, but that's aside from the structure. So if the if core functional extended are baked into the platform descriptor, then would the extended be like say these are what is available in this platform? These are the things that are able to be activated. They're able to be added by FOLIO because the hosting institution trusts this range of things. That conversation is that?
Yes. So the answer is yes. The question was, does the presence of an application listed at the extended tier in a platform descriptor represent some form of validation that said these are okay to be installed? Is that correct paraphrase? So yes, that is the notion, and I sort of loosely refer to that as there's some compatibility that's been established for those ones. So they know they work. The responsibility does fall on the provider of those extended applications to make sure they work, but there is, it gets to one of those challenges, which is we need to have some form of validation or qualification mechanism that you can point to and say, yes, I've gone through steps required and solid criteria but I'm not sure it was next.
Hi. So for the app to be accepted to the platform, into the acceptance process, and it will be separate accepting process for all the platforms and all the versions. I mean, when the version of the platform changes, like in App Store or in Android store, the developers get notifications that there's some changes that might affect your app. So we, as someone who delivers an app, know that we have to look at next release, make some fixes. I'm just wondering which way will it be? I mean, will we be the one, we as the application provider, be the one to look at or to keep on track with the changes, or will we somehow notified about what changes the part that we use?
Right. So let me try to paraphrase your question. Correct me if I'm wrong. So the question is, when platforms evolve and get version changes, platform and maybe a whole new higher level version, how does that affect the application developers who want to contribute? Do they need to ensure that they have a compatibility with any version of the platform? And how do they know that these changes are happening? Is that question? Yes. So yeah, that is part of the challenges. It's part of the, how do you with any platform that exists out there, Android, any development of an application in Android has to keep track of new releases of the platform that are coming. It's pulled into the FOLIO community when we start planning and producing the next release to ensure that information is made available as to what the breaking changes might be and allow the application developers to keep up with that and update their applications on a parallel track. At least that's how I see it working. Others may have question of keeping track, participating. Can't write an application once, any kind of a system and expect it to be good for all time. It does have to move ahead with changes.
I mean, you're starting to get into the application talk a little bit almost. But I will mention that I pointed out earlier that modules obviously have versions. Module descriptors capture that. Applications also have versions, but there's dependencies between modules. We're all familiar with that. There's also dependencies between applications. And so those dependencies will be defined and it'll essentially boil down to where they're breaking changes between this module that you're developing and another application that, this application that you're developing, and another application that I depend on. Go ahead, Jeremy. And then Owen's next.
So would you mind pulling up the slide that shows the flower release next to the platform? Like kind of the vertical no. Yeah, that one. Okay, so there was first of all, I want to echo what Ian said. This stuff is super exciting. I think there are a lot of benefits to be had from exploring this topic of the platform. That said, I'm kind of confused about, and I think this touches on Kristen's question a little bit. The flower release that's a kind of like what is or is not a part of the flower release is kind of a community decision. It's larger than any particular institution that might be deploying Folio. And since the flower release, according to this diagram, requires the difference between extended and functional be defined, doesn't it seem like then that division is also a community discussion and not a per institution discussion?
Yes. Yeah. So you have a loud voice. Maybe I don't need to repeat that. But that is the point of the question. The key to the question is, if flower release comes from the community and the flower release needs to include definitions of applications that are in the extended tier, then that also becomes a community decision. Yes, that's true. I agree. So the way I look at it is I think about it as this is a platform defined by the community. This is the platform from the project. And it's a complete platform, has everything in there, but it is segregated into pieces that identify what goes into the file release and what, in the bottom two tiers here, we'll go through a much more rigorous and thorough testing validation process to ensure that it really works. The optional ones, there may be some qualifications, certification, but I would think that they don't necessarily offer the same level of guarantee from providers of this particular platform.
It's that last bullet on the challenges slide about what platforms does the community provide and who manages that? How do we determine applications live in each tier? Those are questions that still need to be answered. Go ahead, on.
I will just comment on that to say that the product council has sometimes asked itself or been asked, what is the product? And it seems to me like if that could be part of the answer here, that if there is a LSP to be defined, what is, in the LSP platform for the community. And we've also talked, whether that's one or many, like not all libraries using Folio are necessarily using the same. Anyway, but my question is about the challenge you mentioned about the module dependencies or application dependencies, if they're at the application level that you'll come on to tomorrow. Do you have any thoughts about what the work to reduce those dependencies look like? Because it was the first thing that sprang to my mind as soon as you started talking about this, is that we can't do this unless that work is done, and they are, currently just really meshed.
Yeah, true. So to repeat the question online, it's, do we have any thought as to what is involved in reducing the dependencies to allow us to follow this model? And yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big tangled mess right now. or try to create a dependency diagram in Folio, you'll see what was mentioned earlier in different names, Getty Monster. We'll get our own Getty Monster, but I do think that it's an incremental process, and we need to sort of maybe take it one piece at a time and may not get down to the ultimate model of the really tight, separate, small applications, but maybe we have some larger applications on a first pass, break it up and remove, we address the dependencies at that point, and then we can break those down further in further releases. But that said, I also am almost convinced that some dependencies are more problematic than others. If we focus on the ones that are the biggest problem, it could probably allow a lot of things to be broken up. And one of the things that comes to mind is always the board for that. Close in Folio. Get that one out of there, we break that one up, that would be a huge win. Right, Mark.
Do all elements of that stack behind the cat there, they all have to be hosted in the same place?
Question is, do all the elements in the stack need to be hosted in the same place? So that's a technical question. Currently with Folio, that is kind of the requirement, but in theory, no, because Folio is all API based, and really, some of the APIs could be pointing to different locations, but I don't think we have the mechanisms in place to define those in a rigorous fashion. But it is ultimately possible. It's not immediately. I see it. Maybe some people, Jason, very deep in that type of thing. Better answer.
My experience, to follow up on what I mean, it is possible to do it, and you could split out. You'd have to be picky, right? I mean, you could, in theory, have your Folio backend minus the database on premise and have RDS be your target, or the LDP or MetaDB or whatever your other reporting. So, in theory, you can piecemeal out what do I want to be responsible for, and what do I just want to pay somebody the easy button for? Like managing high available Postgres is hard. RDS is really nice. So, yeah, that's that goes back to the list you had of Kafka, OpenSearch, Elasticsearch, whatever. All of those pieces are all API driven. Got a tunnel to the cloud. You could pay Amazon or pay someone to pay Amazon Azure to run those. You don't have to, so you can just focus on running the core platform. Your flower release. We looked a little bit at that. We went live.
Does it take for a vision like this to actually come to reality? It has something to do with our space of we're in the middle of lots of integration. So right now we are kind of approaching these browser-based application. Any consideration if Folio is going that direction? How can we later on maybe?
Right. So yeah. So the question is, how long does it take to transition to a model like this, given that Folio is a living project that has ongoing implementation? So yeah, this is not going to be something that is done very quickly. I think it'll probably take order of years to get fully there, but ideally we could do it a piece at a time. But that said, I think there's an overall theme in WOLFcon this year, which is that Folio has grown number of years, and early on we had tremendous efforts, lots of innovation, lots of deep changes to get us to a point where we can actually start deploying Folio and having it use in libraries. And we're at that plateau now. And now we're very much focused on implementations, as you say, because there's a working system, we're implementing it, right? But we're getting to that next scale. Library of Congress with consortium, but we do have to invest in ramping up on a parallel track to implementation. The platforms, the architecture, everything else to do to better support that. So it's gonna have to happen in parallel, definitely. But it's gonna take some amount of time. Certainly will take longer, given that we have existing deployments, because we're backward compatibility. We're adding on to the house while we are living in it.
Fortunately, we are building on top, but I mean, as Vince mentioned early on in the presentation, it might have made more sense to have the application talk first. But regardless, so I mean, in order for this to work, we need to go through the whole exercise of, moving towards applications and so forth. But all that stuff builds on what we have today. We already have the module descriptors, everything else. We're not ripping the rug from underneath Folio. We're building on top. Yeah, it's not going to happen overnight, but we're not really shaking up everything. All right, we have 2 minutes left. Time for 1 or 2 more questions. Anyone else? Person?
Would you like to build it scriptures? Is the next step to go systematically through all the apps and create descriptors fit into this?
Right. The question is the next step to go and create application descriptors so they can be incorporated here? Generally, the answer is yes. That is one of the first next steps we have to do. And we'll be covering that in the talk tomorrow on the applications. But yeah, thank you for the perfect segue to advertise that.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
I know the right answer to this question is we need to talk about this some more, but I'm just asking for your opinion. Would you characterize the discriminating factor between core and functional and extend it as more of a technical or product decision or a hybrid?
Right. The question is the distinction between functional and extended a technical distinction or a product decision? I think it probably would be product, in my opinion, if you're asking for my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's really about things that are optional as opposed to things that are technically different.
I think the core is technically focused, right?
Okay.
It's technically what do you need to run things on top of it, right? And Vince mentioned we already have those platform minimal, essentially that. It allows you to have a system that you can run and log into, and that's about it. My perspective, that's a technical. But above that, I agree. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for those.